You've probably noticed a lot of gluten-free foods in the store or labels that now say gluten-free. Today on Being Well, we'll learn more about celiac disease and gluten intolerance, including the difference between the two. Our guest is Dietitian Kristina Adams, who has a lot of great information to share, so don't go away. Production of Being Well is made possible in part by Sarah Bush Lincoln Health System, supporting healthy lifestyles, eating a heart-healthy diet, staying active, managing stress, and regular checkups are ways of reducing your health risks. Proper health is important to all at Sarah Bush Lincoln Health System. Information available at sarahbush.org. Additional funding by Jazzercise of Charleston. Thanks for joining us for Being Well. I'm your host, Lori Casey, and as I said before, today we're talking about celiac disease and gluten-free, and our guest is Dietitian Kristina Adams, who is the Director of Weight Management and Wellness at Sarah Bush.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So this is a big topic, and you see it everywhere. Gluten-free foods, foods without gluten. We're going to kind of dispel some myths and kind of get some good information today.
Yes.
Tell me first, what's gluten and where can we find it in food?
That's a great question. Gluten is actually found in wheat products, and it's a protein, and it's found in wheat, barley, and rye. It tends to be the elasticity or the binder in those products. So if you think of that, kind of is very similar with bread products.
Okay, so I think we'll start with the big question. There's a difference between celiac disease and gluten intolerance. Let's tackle celiac disease first. What is that? What are the symptoms of it? And how do we go about figuring out if we have it or not?
Right. Well, celiac disease is actually an autoimmune response to what happens when your body eats something that has gluten in it. Mm-hmm. So basically your intestines have this inflammation, this reaction to that gluten in the foods. So it's kind of where I want to say attacks itself, but that's essentially what's happening. If there's a gluten intolerance, a sensitivity, or an allergy, those are separate, where there may just be an uncomfortable feeling from something you ate, not really this full force autoimmune reaction going on.
So if people have celiac disease, is it celiacs or celiac? Clarify that.
Celiac.
Okay, so if you have that, what are the symptoms of it?
There are quite a few. That's the challenge with celiac disease, is that it can mimic a lot of other problems or other issues that may be happening. So nausea, vomiting, constipation, diarrhea, there could be weight gain, there could be weight loss. There's a lot of malabsorption issues, so there's iron deficient anemia, there's possible vitamin K, vitamin D, calcium deficiencies, which lead into maybe other long-term issues if not left untouched. Also lactose intolerance can be a precursor to this too. So there's a lot of underlying, symptoms that without testing, we're not know.
Gastrointestinal disease.
Exactly.
Very similar.
And that's where the misnomer is. It's not a gastrointestinal disease. It is an autoimmune response. So there's a very fine line there where it's, going in and being tested to make sure it's not irritable bowel syndrome or chronic fatigue or diverticulitis or, many other symptomatic problems that are very common and sound the same.
Is this a relatively, people have probably always had it, but it seems like we're starting to hear more and more about it.
And I think it's because of diagnosis. We're being much more aware of the disease with all the GI symptoms and then also the autoimmune response part of it. So there's a lot more testing being done and a lot more awareness for that testing.
So what can happen to your intestines and your system if you have it and you don't do anything about it?
There's a lot of underlying problems that can peak, and many of them, once again, are we might be unaware till it's been diagnosed as another issue. But osteoporosis, because of the malabsorption property of calcium, also dental enamel erosion from the malabsorptive process of vitamin D and calcium. Long-term effects of the intestine is leading to more malabsorptive properties with iron deficiency anemia, vitamin B12 deficiencies, which is related to our nervous system, so a lot of muscle spasms and issues, possibly even down the road to infertility and miscarriages when it comes to childbirth.
So it's a serious disease.
It is.
It's not just, I get a little intestinal distress from eating gluten. It can lead to other things down the road. So if someone thinks they have it, what's the process? How does it diagnose?
It's a very actually simple diagnosis through a blood test. So it's not too terrible invasive for that part. But if you do come back as a positive with a blood test, then we do want to go and check for a biopsy of the small intestine to confirm that diagnosis.
And what were you were telling me some very important information. If you think you have celiac disease, what is the thing you should
Where's
not
the camera?
do?
Do not stop eating gluten.
Okay, and why is that? Because that seems contrary. If you think you have this thing that bothers you, you should keep eating gluten?
Right, and it's because you want to go in with the symptoms.
Okay.
All too often we're self-diagnosing, so we want to feel better. So we're going to rule out the foods that are causing problems and quit eating those foods, and then we feel better. But we're like, oh, maybe I still get checked now, and we go in and we get a false negative.
Okay.
So it is important to see your doctor first before you self-diagnose and start making changes with your diet.
So you actually need to go in, unfortunately, symptomatic with it. Okay.
Yes.
So is it hereditary? If your mother has it, might you get it as well?
It is. It is very genetic related, so you really want to pay attention to any food intolerances that family members have, specifically immediate, but also extended family, and kind of knowing what, if there's even IBS in the family, or if there's lactose intolerance, any kind of issues related to whether it be a GI disease or not.
So are you seeing more women have it than men, or does it not matter?
Not necessarily.
So you've gone in, you get the diagnosis. What's the treatment for it?
Gluten-free foods, I should say.
Foods for the rest of your life.
Gluten-free diet.
There's no medication, or
there's no cure. There's no medication. Label reading is probably the biggest concern you want to be aware of once you do find out the diagnosis, so that you're aware of where these foods, where this ingredient in these foods is found, because it is very hidden in a lot of foods, especially medications we may be taking. Not aware that gluten could be in those.
Okay.
Also in a lot of flavor enhancers in our foods where it might be fine in, so like imitation crab meat or self-basting turkeys, bouillon cubes, things that you might not really think of as a wheat product.
Okay, so we want to talk about gluten-free and gluten intolerance, but I do want to talk about where you find gluten in food. Obviously in bread and pasta, but there are hidden places as well, such as what?
Well, some of the ones I just mentioned, the medications, flavor enhancers, a lot of your baked goods, so a lot of the processed foods that we may be eating too can be found in those. Pastas is going to be found in as well. Also communion wafers, who knew? So you have to be careful even at church. So there are lots of places to look for it. Oats is on the fence whether it's gluten okay or not. Some are gluten intolerant when it comes to oats, but if it says it's gluten-free, it has to be labeled on the product to be a gluten-free food.
So when you're looking at a label, does it always say gluten, or does it go by other names?
Most of the time it will say gluten, or it'll have the word wheat or barley or rye.
Okay, so those are the things you look for. If those ingredients are in there, chances are pretty well that it is gluten. Medications surprise me, like prescription medications, over the counter?
Could be both.
Okay, so that's celiac disease. Let's talk what probably is more common are people who have that gluten intolerance. What is the difference between that and celiac disease?
Gluten intolerance, or even a gluten sensitivity, just kind of, you mentioned earlier, you may just have an upset stomach when you eat something, but you don't have all the other pronounced symptoms or other deficiencies possibly that go with it. You just may notice that your tummy is a little upset sometimes when you have wheat bread versus a rye or a barley, or it could be one or the other. It doesn't mean that you would have an intolerance to all three. It could just be wheat, it could just be rye or barley. But you might not notice that you're okay if you have rice, but if you had wheat or pasta, then it's, you might have that tummy upset.
So this intolerance, it's not an allergic reaction?
No, and that's a good point, because an allergy is actually more of a pronounced I won't say external, but more of like you would break out into hives, or you might have a lip swell, or something that's going to be more pronounced, I would say, where there's actually an allergic reaction happening versus just an intolerance or sensitivity to where your stomach may be upset.
So the intolerance, if you have that or you think you have that, what are some of the symptoms again? Kind of an upset stomach, and people say they feel bloated.
Yeah, there's bloated, cramping, a little bit of that, maybe some nausea, probably not vomiting if it's a sensitivity or an intolerance, but mostly just an uncomfortable, maybe some diarrhea or constipation could follow that too. But usually it can be related to a food that you've eaten recently. The symptoms are fairly onset quickly.
They'll come on pretty quick. So is it something that you can, maybe as a kid you could have ate all the noodles and bread, and then as an adult you kind of developed that sensitivity? Could
be, or it could go the other way too.
Okay.
It could have been that you've developed it as an adult, where it was fine as a kid, or you had it as a kid and now you're okay as an adult. It can go either way with the intolerance. So
do you find that people who maybe have gluten intolerance may also have lactose intolerance? Are there any correlation between the two?
It could be. What they're finding more is with lactose intolerance is more pronounced if you're celiac. So you're seeing that and there's more research with type 1 diabetics are finding more celiac disease. There's a lot of other autoimmune disorders that could possibly also be celiac positive.
So if you think you're gluten intolerant, do you need to go to the doctor, or is that unlike celiac, which you probably shouldn't self-diagnose? What about if you are gluten intolerant or you think you are?
It was same thing as celiac though. You do want to go and be tested and make sure you rule out other issues. Like I mentioned, there could be IBS going on, there could be diverticulitis, there could be Crohn's, there could be chronic fatigue. So there could be other issues that are underlying, that it may not just be a simple intolerance. There could be something else maybe leading to that.
So you're a dietitian, so you go to the grocery store. It's like a lot of us go to the store. You notice there's now whole sections of gluten-free food, and things are labeled without gluten. What is your opinion on that now, people who just choose to not eat gluten?
Well, it's probably not the best route to go for. It depends on what reason they're looking for. If it's looking for weight loss, it's probably not going to be the best route to go. A lot of the gluten-free foods may actually contain more calories because they are replacing the gluten that's missing. So there may be added sugars for flavor, there may be added fat for flavor. So there may be extra things there that we're really not aware of that we're comparing to other ingredients or other foods that we're eating. And a lot of times, we do need to eat less of some of these foods that contain wheat, such as white breads and pastas and baked goods. But a lot of times, wheat isn't the culprit, it's the amount, or the quantity that we're eating of those foods.
Slices of bread or donuts, because I think we've come up with this, you see in popular media and everywhere, white sugar, white flour, bad, which in moderation, anything is okay. Did the white flour and the gluten thing all kind of come together? And
possibly, because there's a lot of thought out there with clean eating, and some of that is to rule out the white flour, the white sugar, anything white in color generally to eat. But a lot of it just goes back to more of the portion sizes or the quantities that we're getting of some of these foods and where they're coming from.
So can you actually, if you say, I'm going to be gluten-free for health reasons, can you actually be missing out on some important nutrients?
Could be, depends on what food you're choosing, because if you think about it, French fries are both gluten-free and vegetarian.
And good sometimes.
And not much else added in there that's beneficial. So, gluten-free foods, depending on what the base of them is, whether it's possibly corn or rice or quinoa, they themselves have great benefits, but there could be other nutrients that are missing because a lot of wheat foods are fortified. So there's a lot of beneficial vitamins and minerals in our wheat foods. But once again, it goes back to overconsumption of some of these foods.
So what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions about gluten-free out there that you'd like to clear up on this platform right here?
Well, the biggest one I think we've already mentioned is that it's not a fad diet. This is a true, a diet to treat an autoimmune disorder. So we really need to treat it as, medicine, if you will, of a way to treat someone, and not as a diet to help lose weight. If there's an intolerance or sensitivity, maybe I've had patients say, I feel better if I quit eating this, then okay, maybe there is a sensitivity going on there to the gluten, not necessarily full-blown celiac, autoimmune disorder, but there may be some valid, credentials to why you are feeling better to that.
Is it, I don't want to say, because we have more of these gluten-free foods, is it a little bit easier for people who suffer with celiac disease to live a little easier, healthier life?
It's much easier now than even 2 years ago. I mean, there's so much more available. I had a friend that was, recently diagnosed, and she was ordering everything online because she just couldn't find it in the stores locally. So we're seeing a lot more of it available locally. We're also seeing a little bit of the marketing gimmicks out there too, labeling foods gluten-free that never had gluten to begin with. So it's kind of misleading to our public to say, oh, look, water's gluten-free. Well, there was never gluten in to begin with.
Kind of like the fat-free fad in the early 90s. Why do you think, what is it about carbs? Carbs seem to get the bad rap. We had for a while everyone on, eating high protein. And why is it that we automatically think carbs are the problem for why we're gaining weight?
They're in everything. I mean, they are in everything we eat predominantly.
Are they the most plentiful?
They are.
Okay.
And we're finding it, because it ranges everything from wheat products to fruits and vegetables to, our candy. Sweet treats, ice creams, desserts. So, it's in everything that we eat. And a lot of times those are the foods that tend to drive our cravings when it comes to the sweets, and that is a carbohydrate. You have to go then it's further to the simple carbs versus complex carbs, and looking at that and looking ones that are higher in fiber versus, the lower fiber choices, which tend to be the ones that don't stay with us very long, and hence we're hungry again.
But let me ask, what are the carbohydrates and things like with gluten, what do they do for the body? Energy.
It's our prime energy source. So if we're not active or burning off those calories that we're eating, that's what's going to get converted and stored as fat. So we really need to monitor not only our energy levels, but also how we're eating to respond to that. So someone who is exercising regularly can, more validate those extra carbohydrates for that reason versus someone who maybe has a sedentary job that doesn't get as much activity unless they are doing it before work or after work to get in their exercise.
So if you're avoiding gluten for various reasons, celiac disease, gluten intolerance, you can still get your carbohydrates from sources like corn.
The quinoa, it's a grain also, and also rice.
Okay.
Wild rice, long grain, brown rice, all of those.
And a lot of those I've noticed, like now they make pasta out of rice flour and bread out of rice flour. I haven't tried any of it, but fortunately I'm not gluten intolerant.
Yes, it's come a long way because there's many pastas out of quinoa too. So there's a lot of what you would think of as bread replacers out there being made with corn and rice flour. And amaranth is another one that's a flour replacer that you'll see a lot of breads made of.
So there are options out there, and more probably down the line.
Yes, very much so.
So gluten-free, gluten seems to be a hot topic right now. It seems to me that now sugar and added sugar seems to be a new thing. I've heard that they may be changing the food label to reflect added sugar.
Yes, the biggest change on there is it's going to be more readily seen, bigger print, bolder print on there when it comes to the sugar content, and also more reflective serving sizes or portion sizes of what we're eating. Sometimes when you get a 20-ounce bottle of pop to drink, it says 2.5 servings on it. And most likely
small print sometimes.
Exactly.
most of the time.
We're going to consume that bottle ourselves and not share that with 2.5 people. So chances are that will be the biggest change we'll notice on the food labeling, is be more reflective of how we eat.
Okay, so it's probably an obvious question, but why is the added sugar thing such a big deal?
Mostly with the extra calories.
Okay.
As I mentioned earlier, carbohydrates are energy source. So if we're not, equaling out that intake versus output, then we're going to see extra calories being packed on and carrying around extra weight. So with the extra calories coming in from sugar, from the foods we're eating, we want to be careful with that balance.
Okay, well, while I have a dietitian here, I want to ask her a few questions just about nutrition in general, because that's always a good topic to end with. If you had to add a couple of, I'll just call them superfoods, to someone's diet, what are some things you'd really recommend that you think give you great nutritional punch?
One that comes to mind that's fairly hot in the news is the chia seeds.
Okay.
At first, when I heard about it, I kind of just poo-pooed it and didn't really think too much about it. But the more it's been around, the more I've researched it, there's actually some fairly decent nutritional benefit to it, mainly in fiber and omega-3 fatty acids in very small amounts. I mean, in a half ounce, you're getting the same amount of fiber that you would get in 3 slices of bread. So since we've been talking about gluten here.
Let me ask a silly question. Are these chia seeds the same thing that
they are?
That make the chia pet?
Really? with that. They are.
You can just go get a chia pet if you can't buy chia seeds.
Exactly.
So what is it? I mean, what benefits do these little tiny seeds have?
They give us the benefit of the fiber in a much smaller quantity, and also, as I mentioned, if we are gluten intolerant or sensitive or celiac, then these would be a way that you could get that additional fiber source in a very small amount. Also, omega-3 fatty acids, which you know have heart protective properties. So once again, you can get that benefit from these foods too. And then it's a very small amount, so you could sprinkle them in cereals and yogurt.
I've got them in smoothies before.
Exactly.
It's a little crunchy, but not. It almost tastes like poppy seeds.
Yeah, they're very small too, and a lot of times they're more tolerable because you don't have to grind them or refrigerate them. You can just sprinkle them in as is, so there's no worried about the rancidity.
If you don't like that feeling of those seeds, can you grind them?
You can.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
It doesn't do anything to the food value.
No.
Okay, what about in the fruit and vegetable land? It seemed for a while that kale, which was this garnish on our plate for years, seemed to suddenly become the new green.
Kale is still popular. It's a little bit challenging because of the texture. If you've had it raw in salads, it does have a little bit heartier texture as a green in your salad. So many have gone to processing it as a smoothie, so it's a little bit more palatable, throwing it in with stir fries or maybe disguising it in a soup. That would be a little bit better to ingest, but kale still has wonderful benefits.
Okay, my other one is we see a lot of Greek yogurt on the market. Is Greek yogurt better for you than just regular yogurt?
It depends on what you're looking for. It does have a higher amount of protein in the Greek yogurt. Tends to have a little bit more calcium, but it does make a difference on what you're looking for because calorie-wise it might have a little bit more. So you do have to be careful of the packaging of the containers. You can find 100 calorie or less Greek yogurts, so you just have to look at your labels for that.
And I had it this morning. As a matter of fact, it has that thicker texture to it, and it is good in smoothies.
That's right.
It's not so good plain. It kind of tastes a little sour by itself.
Yes, it is a good replacer plain though as a sour cream, and you get much more nutritional benefit.
All right, so any other nutritional things, advice you'd like to give for people out there watching for just general health and wellness?
I think it just goes back to being a cautious consumer, and label reading is very important to just make sure that you truly know what you're getting and turn that box around.
Yes. Kristina, thanks so much for stopping by Being Well today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
In our 24/7 world, many of us have become obsessed with our high-tech devices, be it a smartphone, e-reader, computer, or other gadgets. But when we don't use them correctly or just plain overdo it, we may get some aches and pains. Holly Furfer has more in today's Health Minute.
Pat Newby has traveled to 87 countries and 7 continents, but a recent trip left her with a nagging neck pain.
I thought the worst because the pain was that severe.
The culprit? Her e-reader.
We're dubbing it smartphone finger. Some other problems are mouse tendinitis or sometimes just a tablet neck.
And that's what Newby had. She strained her neck and shoulder muscles from hours of looking down at an e-reader in her lap. The remedy? Getting her body back into proper alignment, starting with sitting up straight.
You want the top of your screen to be roughly at or just below eye level. Okay. You want your shoulders relaxed, okay? Elbows close to your body, that's wonderful. And you're already protecting your lower body because you want your thighs parallel to the floor. You want your hips, knees, and ankles at 90-degree angles, and you want your feet flat on the floor.
Taking frequent breaks can also help reduce injury. For today's Health Minute, I'm Holly Furfer.
Production of Being Well is made possible in part by Sarah Bush Lincoln Health System, supporting healthy lifestyles, eating a heart-healthy diet, staying active, managing stress, and regular checkups are ways of reducing your health risks. Proper health is important to all at Sarah Bush Lincoln Health System. Information available at sarahbush.org. Additional funding by Jazzercise of Charleston. Being Well is also available online at our YouTube channel, youtube.com/WEIUTV. Just look for the Being Well playlist. Here you can view current as well as past episodes.